Good to see you again, Mr. Sunak. Can I refer you to today's Financial Times? You have an interview in which you warn it would be, quotes, complacent and irresponsible to ignore the risk of markets losing confidence in the British economy. Are you saying that that could come about if Liz Truss were the Prime Minister?
No, I was saying any Chancellor, any Prime Minister should not be complacent about those risks because, we currently have a very large amount of debt. A lot of that debt is very much like a floating rate mortgage. So as inflation moves, a large amount of our interest payments also move at the same time. That's a risk that we have that other countries don't have to the same degree. And similarly, again, people may not know this, but compared to most other countries, we rely far more on foreign investors to finance our deficits in this country. A former central bank governor actually called it relying on the kindness of strangers.
This is Mark Carney, of course. Yeah, indeed.
So the thing that anyone who wants this job or is thinking about running our economy needs to be cognizant of is that their economic plan, their plan for our borrowing and spending is one which will continue to command the confidence of the markets. And quite frankly, that's the right conservative approach because that's a responsible management of the British economy.
So just give the listeners on LBC, the viewers on Global Player, your party members here, what would represent complacent and irresponsible behaviour? What are you getting at? What do you fear?
But it comes down to borrowing. It comes down to the markets having confidence that the trajectory of our public finances is one that they have confidence in, right? That they feel that we are on a path to sustainability, that we're not constantly just going to be borrowing money that we have no hope of paying back. That is a pretty standard tenet of what anyone who's investing in the UK and buying our debt would like to see. And that's why having a credible plan is important. As I said, that's what the Conservative Party's always stood for, and it's what it will stand for under my leadership.
Your rival, Liz Truss, has just ruled out any more windfall taxes and ruled out energy rationing this winter, as France is considering. Can you do the same?
So I introduced a windfall tax as Chancellor, and I'm glad that I did, because it was the right thing to do. I don't actually know if Liz supports it or doesn't support it, but I think it is absolutely the right thing at a time when energy companies are making billions of pounds of profits because of a war. That's not right. And we should exceptionally tax those and help use those for people's bills.
And certainly support in the room. I take from that you would be prepared to do it again.
We've got it in place, but as I said, I think in the situation that we're in, it was the right thing to do, and I'm glad I did it, quite frankly. And I think your listeners probably all agree.
Yes, and energy rationing?
We shouldn't rule anything out, because the challenges that we face with this crisis are significant. And as many European countries are looking at, how we can all optimise our energy usage. That is a sensible thing for us to be doing as a country, because whether it's improving the energy efficiency of our homes, changing how our boilers work.
Why is inflation here so high? An organisation called Goldman Sachs, I think you know it well, is suggesting that inflation could reach 22.4%. We're currently at 10.1%. France at 6.8%, Spain at 10.4%, Germany at 8.8%, the US at 8.5%. Can you give us an assurance that inflation won't rise under you, and why is it so much higher anyway?
No, I spoke about this as Chancellor. It's particularly high here for two reasons. One is the mix of our energy is different to many other countries. So the more dependent you are on natural gas, for example, the more that you have the inflationary impact. That's what we're seeing. But the second thing that we have here that most European countries don't have is tightness in our labour market. Now, many people here will be running businesses because it's a fantastic Conservative audience of small business owners. And other than energy bills, the thing that probably is the biggest challenge is finding workers, and it has been for a while. And that labour inflation is something that we are experiencing that the rest of Europe is not. So those are two significant reasons. Now, I can't give you a guarantee that it's going to fall straight away. I think this is the biggest challenge that we face. But what I can guarantee you is that given that I have consistently said that inflation is the number one priority facing our country, it will be my number one priority. I've been saying that since the beginning of this campaign. I can guarantee that it will fall far faster with my plan than it will with anyone else's.
You Mr. Sunak, Mr. Sunak, you are nothing if not a numbers man. Can I share some more with you? We go back about 4 years when Sajid Javid, the then Home Secretary, cut his holiday short because 300 migrants had made the crossing in 1 month. 300 in 1 month. You'll be aware that last week 1,295 souls made the crossing on 1 day. We spend £4.75 million a day in hotel costs for these people. What would you do about it?
Well, Nick, I mentioned it in my speech for a reason, because I think it's one of the emergencies that our country faces.
Detail, respectfully.
Yeah, so, well, in the interest of time, those who are particularly interested in this, there is a detailed 10-point plan on my
Give
website.
me the top three.
So I'll give you the top two. Why don't we do that in the interest of time? I think the first thing is we very quickly need to move away from the European definition of asylum, because it is far too broad and it is exploited by everybody. And there are different international standards that we can use. A second thing is that we need to toughen up our foreign policy, because at the moment, we might well be talking to a country about a trade deal that we want to do with them. We may even be giving them overseas aid, but we don't at the same time insist that they must take back their failed asylum seekers. Now, I think that's wrong, and we should change that, and that will help.
Can you give my listeners and your members here a promise it would never hit 1,295 per day again under you?
No, what I can say is with my plan, I'm confident that we can get a grip of it, but it is not going to be easy. It's going to require us to be bold, and I'm prepared. What I can tell your listeners is I'm prepared to do whatever it takes, legal changes as required, to make the Rwanda policy work, to follow through on my 10-point plan, because as I said in my speech, it is the fundamental right of a country to have proper control of its borders, and that's what I will deliver as Prime Minister.
How has Priti Patel performed in her role as Home Secretary?
Well, I mean, Priti deserves enormous credit for implementing the Rwanda plan and the job of the new Prime Minister. And the job of the new Prime Minister will be to make sure that that plan actually can be worked, and that's what we will need to do.
Mr. Sunak, she takes credit for implementing the Rwanda. It hasn't been implemented.
I said we have just put it in place. The job of the new Prime Minister will be to put it in to actually make sure that we can get it to work, and that will require
Boris
legal
Johnson
changes.
and Prince Charles have been to Rwanda, but no one else. We haven't been able to get anyone else there. That's the reality.
Yes, and look, it was always
Rwanda
going
plan
to be.
won't work, will it?
Well, No, it can work. But it was always going to be the case that we were going to face legal challenges on that plan. That was always going to be the case. It's not a new thing that's happened. But that's why I said very specifically that I will do whatever it takes, legal changes as required, to make that plan work, because it is the right plan.
100 quid, bet with me, money going to Conservative Party funds, not one person goes to Rwanda in the first 6 months of your term.
No, oh gosh, I mean, it's not. I mean, we don't need the money for your party. But what we need to do is make the plan work, right? So.
Okay. Will Priti Patel be Home Secretary?
It's not right for me to comment on people's jobs.
Would you wish to retain her services?
Again, that wouldn't be right for me to comment on anyone's jobs. I mean, that's a bizarre thing to ask, right? What I can say is,
it's not a bizarre thing to ask.
It is. It actually is. I mean, it really is. I think that's not the right thing.
I don't know why it's bizarre to ask you.
No, it is. It's not appropriate. It's definitely not appropriate. I'd say, look, I've got enormous I've been a colleague of Priti's for the time I've been in government, and she's done a terrific job under very difficult circumstances, and I've got nothing but admiration for her.
Can I share one last set of statistics with you, which would very much cross your brief as PM and whoever is Home Secretary? I probably don't need to know you with crime. It's at the highest rate in England and Wales for some 20 years. And another worrying statistic, the percentage of crimes resulting in a charge or a summons is at 5.6%. That is the lowest since records began. In London, you can't even wear a smart watch without fear you'll be robbed. What would you do?
Yeah, so, I mean, particularly in London, this has become intolerable. And right, for everyone here, having the anxiety that if you're trying to walk home from the tube at night, particularly if you're a young woman, that is something that's wrong. And I think the first thing we need to do is to squarely hold to account the failings of Sadiq Khan, because on his watch, right, if you look at the record, there's nothing inevitable about this. If you look at the record of the previous administration, led by one Boris Johnson, and indeed the policing deputy mayor, Kit Malthouse. I don't know if Kit's here, but under their leadership, I think the murder rate in London halved and violent crime fell by a quarter. And they've showed that it is absolutely possible to do it. If you are prepared, as a mayor, to actually go and do the right things.
What should Mayor Khan be doing that he's not doing?
So, so give you one example is stop and search, right? And I mentioned it in my speech, right? And I said it's an effective policing tactic. It's an effective policing tactic. And I was saying this actually, by the way, up in Manchester, with the same problem. Got a Labour mayor, Labour police and crime commissioners, the police force is in special measures. And why? Because these people are more interested in, over there it's about getting, people to making it easier for them to take illegal drugs. And here he's more interested in banning pizza advertising on the tube. And what he should be doing is actually getting the police to fight crime, right? It's not...
There is a school of thought that the mayor should be relieved of responsibility for policing. That is to say, the commissioner reports directly to the Home Secretary, who would report to the PM. So the mayor is Would you support that?
No, well, I think, look, the job that we have to do is just replace the mayor, right? We have to win the election and replace the mayor. That's the way to solve this problem.
All right.
Look, we can play our part in central government as well, right? And one of the things I want to look at is sentencing. And the reason is actually, and if you look at it, actually people may not know this, but over half of all the convictions in our country are caused by just a very small number of criminals. Less than 9% of criminals account for over half of our convictions. These career criminals, on average, have 19 convictions. 19. Now, I've said we are a compassionate party. We believe in giving people a second chance, maybe even a third chance, but not a 19th chance. Okay. So we do need to look at sentencing for those career criminals.
Lastly on policing, can I just suggest you make it sound a little bit simple by just changing the mayor? The Met is in special measures, as you'll be aware. That is how poorly the Met is performing. It's not as simple as a change of mayor, is it?
Well, I mean, ultimately he is responsible for policing alongside the Met and accountable for that in the capital. So I'm highly confident if we get a Conservative mayor in and change it, because the last time we had a Conservative mayor in London, what happened? Crime fell, murder rates fell. That's what you get with a Conservative government and a Conservative mayor.
Let's talk about, we move away from London to central government. While you and Ms Truss have been touring the country, you might be aware that the Labour Party have picked up a 13-point lead currently. You, or whoever's the PM, are seeking to make history with a fourth consecutive Conservative term. People around here will be knocking on doors and doing whatever they can to try and bring that about. Give me an idea of the amount of damage this has done to the party, the length of this election process.
Well, I think it's right that we have a debate about the ideas because it's an important time in our country. And as I said at the beginning, as I've been going around the country meeting thousands of members, I've been incredibly heartened by the debate, the passion, the energy with which all of you have brought to this debate. But I'm very confident that come Monday, as I said, we will come together and we will get focused on serving the country and taking the fight to Sadiq Khan and Keir Starmer, because that's the opposition and that's what we're going to be united in doing.
Would you, I think it's a final question from me, Mr Sunak, would you as Prime Minister, would you seek a conversation with whoever you could at the 1922 committee never to allow a leadership to go this election to go this long again?
Well,
there might be some support in the room.
Yeah. Well, not if we cut it before we got to this point, Nick. That wouldn't have been good. No, look, I think it's absolutely right that we reflect on the process when it's finished as a party, and I'm sure that's something that both 1922 and the chairman will want to do, because we should always learn the lessons on it. I think actually probably everyone in the room will have a reflection on the TV debates, and actually is there a way we could have done those differently or better? And I think that's something that I would also urge the party to have a look at.
All right, I have actually been advised I do have well, I think that's been addressed before, but thank you. That was a comment about Boris Johnson. Now let's go on to another one. You have given an interview for The Spectator where you said you were concerned that there was too much almost bullying during the COVID period or process, which has support. To which Dominic Cummings responded, you, Mr Sunak, are talking dangerous rubbish, and your interview reads like a man whose epically bad campaign has melted his brain and he's about to quit politics. What would you what would you like to say, or send him a note if he can read it, what would you like to say to Mr. Cummings?
Well, I think that will deal with all the people who thought he was secretly running my campaign at the beginning. So,
ladies and gentlemen, your appreciation for your other candidate, Rishi Sunak.
Right, yeah, no, perfect. Yeah, I'm going to stand up though. Yeah. Thank you. Right.
Okay.
Have you got?
I've just let this die down, then we'll go. I can't actually hear at the minute. Okay. Let's.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. Right.
Okay.
Right. I'm gonna.
Let's go to our first question. Our first question, Mr. Sunak, I think, is it Sarup, sir? Madam Sarup in Westminster? Where are you?
Someone waving up there.
Yes.
Is that they're waving at you?
Go ahead. Oh, yes, they are, the chap in the white vest. Yes, your question.
Hi, Sarup.
Hello, sir.
I had the pleasure to meet you, Rishi, twice in the last week and a half, now 3 times. My question is about, and I think this is something that distinguishes you in this race, it's about ethics and integrity. Now, I would say I quite like Boris, but I think it was a little bit hard done by. But I think the issue of ethics and integrity partially brought down the last administration. So my question is, how will you ensure that your government is the beacon of integrity and ethics?
Yeah. Thank you, Sarup, for the question. It's a great place to start. And look, actually, someone was shouting out about Boris before and me leaving. Look, it wasn't an easy reason. It wasn't an easy decision for me to.
I think they were a bit more disobliging than that about you.
Well, I
anyway,
think they were.
We'll take it as that. Yeah.
I'll be polite back.
Yeah. I certainly heard that.
It wasn't an easy decision for me to make. It was a sad decision, but ultimately, as well as our differences on the economy, I found the government was on the wrong side of an ethical issue that I personally couldn't defend, and that's why I left. And actually, as it turned out, 60 other members of the government also decided to leave because they thought that it wasn't working. And I think that's why your question is right, because that was a problem and it needs to be changed. And that's why I've put restoring trust at the heart of my campaign to be your leader.
Do you, just in a sentence, to pick up on what Sarup said, do you think Boris Johnson was, quotes, hard done by, Mr. Sunak?
Yeah, I think it's been a very difficult period. I worked with him closely for 2 years, and it was very difficult. But what I would say is, when it comes to these ethical issues, we can't constantly be on the wrong side of them. The new leader has to set clear direction from the top. I would reappoint an independent ethics advisor, because I think that will send a strong signal that these things matter.
Christy in Birmingham.
Hello, I'd like to
Hi,
ask,
Christy.
what is the greatest sacrifice that you have made to reach the position that you're in now?
Wow.
Perhaps how this shows your suitability to be Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, that's just very straightforward. I mean, the greatest sacrifice I've made is I have been an appalling husband and father for the past couple of years. It's as simple as that. And my wife is there. And that is something that is really hard for me, because I love my kids to bits, I love my wife to bits, and unfortunately I have not been able to be as present in their lives at all for the past few years as I would like to have been. But that's because I believe that it's an enormous privilege to have these jobs. I care passionately about our country and think I can offer something that will benefit millions of people. That's why I do it, and I'm really blessed to have their support as I do.
But, I mean, candidly, if you're PM, it's not going to get a lot better for a few years.
No, gosh, it's not. No, but I said this is great privilege. That's why I'm
accept
here.
it. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I think it's Ahmed. Is it here, sir? Blue shirt.
Hi, Rishi.
Hi.
Nice to see you again. I'm Dr. Ahmed. I'm working as an old age psychiatrist in Hertfordshire. My question is regarding NHS. NHS has been a topic for for a lot of politicians in the past. Are you going to consider it as a political agenda in the coming years, or are you going to resolve the main issues? I'm talking about the retention and recruitment of medical staff, including doctors and nurses. And are you going to put more funding in NHS? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you. Look, the NHS is unquestionably the country's #1 public service priority. So the first thing we need to do as a party is make sure that we are trusted with the NHS, because if we are not, we will simply not win elections. It's as simple as that. Now, I believe I am trusted with the NHS because I did something difficult as Chancellor. I introduced a new way to fund the NHS and social care. That wasn't easy, but I thought it was the right thing to do to support our doctors and nurses to help recover from the pandemic, get the backlogs down, and fix social care once and for all. Now, that can't be the end of the story, though, because whilst funding is important, we are Conservatives, and we know that we don't measure our success by how much money we spend on things. As Michael demonstrated as Education Secretary, we measure our success by the outcomes we get for the people that we represent, and that's what we need to do. So whether it's my plan to tackle the issue of missed appointments, because that will save us money and get the backlogs down, and that's being tough and different, whether it's changing how we do elective surgery in this country, how we do community diagnostic scanning, whether we change bad leadership in the NHS and call it out and replace it with good leadership, we need to be radical because we need better healthcare and we need lower taxes, and that's what we'll need to do to deliver it.
And it just occurs to me, Mr. Sunak, for some of my listeners, for some of the party members, your idea of missed appointments, just briefly remind people what that is. Is if you don't turn up, I understand, you get fined.
So it's simple. Last year in the NHS, 15 million appointments were missed. 15 million. Not just at our GP surgeries, but in our hospitals too. That's not right. It's depriving people of the care. It's not valuing our doctors' and nurses' time properly. And yes, I want to charge for that. Not because I want to make money from it, but because I want to change the culture in this country so that's not as acceptable. And Nick, the beauty is, because if we can do that, if we move to a system where people cancel them in advance, we've freed up all this extra healthcare capacity, and no one's had to pay an extra pound of taxes, and we can get people treated quicker. But it's the example of something radical and bold that we haven't tried, that we're going to need to try if we want to actually grip this problem.
What would a lot of support? It has a lot of support. What would the level of fine be, Mr. Sunak?
Yeah, I mean, I've said £10, but we should just look at it, because the evidence is...
But I can't get the hospital to answer the phone to tell them I can't go over my bunion. They won't. I don't know if you've ever tried to ring a hospital.
Yeah,
it's quite a business.
Yeah, no, and of course we should have a system that makes it work. But all the evidence is
clear.
It will
need a system, won't it?
Yes, it will. But you know what? This is the thing. When you try something new, there'll be all these people who say, oh gosh, you can't be that tough on people. No, there's always a good excuse. Or there'll be people who say, well, how will you ever get it to work? It's too complicated. You know what? We set up the furlough scheme in a matter of weeks and it saved 10 million jobs. I'm confident we can get this done.
I know you are a considerable fitness aficionado. When did you last need the NHS?
Did I last need it? Actually, I mean, not to talk about it, my father was brilliantly treated by my local hospital just last week, and the Friarage in North Yorkshire in North Allerton. So I just want to pay tribute and thanks to all the massive amount of staff at the Minor Injuries Unit who looked after him then.
Nigel, you're on the next question. Nigel, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Sunak, the unity of the United Kingdom must be a key point for the Prime Minister. Seeing the riot that the SNP runs in Parliament and the amazing statements that come from their leader in Edinburgh, how will you suppress Nicola Sturgeon?
Yes. Thank you, Michael. Look, it's an excellent question. So look, I think when it comes to Scotland, there's probably three things I would say to all of you that I would do as Prime Minister. I think the first is we need to more actively demonstrate the benefit of the United Kingdom government in Scotland. And that's something that we started doing, actually, with Michael and I worked together with Alistair Jack to demonstrate that the UK government was investing in Scottish communities for the first time, and it's changed the conversation. And at the same time, we get to call out the failures of Nicola Sturgeon's leadership, whether it comes to their schools or their hospitals. They're not performing as well as they should. So that's the first thing we need to do. The second thing is to remember, when it comes to the union in Scotland, who are we speaking to? Well, we're not just speaking to ourselves. We're not just speaking to Conservatives, right? We need to talk to all the other people in Scotland who don't vote Conservative but are unionists. So we need to have a leader who can speak to them, and I believe I can. And the third thing... And the third thing, and probably the most important, is to remember this, that nationalism is an incredibly seductive and romantic idea. And if we only meet it with arguments about currency or borrowing or who's going to pay the pensions or trade, it won't be good enough. We've got to have an argument that speaks to people's hearts, a motive argument. And when my grandparents came to this country, they didn't come to England. They came to the United Kingdom, probably like many of you, because it wasn't, to them, it wasn't geography. The United Kingdom wasn't just lines on a map. It represented a set of values. It represented a set of ideas. That's what binds us together, and that's the argument we're going to make, and that's how we're going to protect the Union.
Okay. And Mr. Sunak, just lastly on that, do you view Nicola Sturgeon as an attention seeker and Mark Grayford as a low-energy Jeremy Corbyn? Do you see them in that light?
I think, look, in all these cases, right, we have to respect the fact that these are the legitimately elected leaders of Scotland and Wales. The United Kingdom Prime Minister has to obviously work with them and constructively and demonstrate that to the people of Scotland, that we can work with them. But what do we need to do as Conservatives? We need to take the fight to them and beat them. That's what we need to do.
Money is in Gerard's, Mr. Sunak. Money is in Gerard Cross. Down there, Monique.
Monique, hi.
Good evening, Rishi. At 23, I worked really hard and I was able to buy a property that was without any parental support, just a strong work ethic. It was 20 years ago. My son is 16 and we do all we can to give him a strong work ethic. What is the likelihood of him being able to follow in our footsteps?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. So, look, many of us, right? Many of us here tonight will remember that magical feeling that we experienced when we got the keys to our first flat or our first house, right? How special was that? And then we may well have got married and built a life there, improved it. That is an incredible journey. It's a special journey, and it is a Conservative journey. And we need to make sure that that is possible for your son, Monique. So what are we going to do? Well, we need to increase the supply of housing, right? First of all, Sadiq Khan, failing as always to deliver affordable housing. But there's things we can do. We can densify in our urban areas in a way that is beautiful, like European cities. We can increase the building on brownfield sites, where if we remediate them with government support, we can unlock 1 million sites across the country. And we need to overcome our British aversion to what we call flat pack housing, but the rest of the world calls modular housing because it's faster, higher quality, and cheaper. But we also need to look at the mortgage market. Because many of you here, many of your kids and your grandkids are probably paying a hefty sum in rental payments. And actually, they could afford a mortgage, right, if they were given one. And indeed, the mortgage payment may well be lower than the rent payment that they're currently paying, right? And I can see lots of nodding. So that's why Michael and I in our previous jobs started a review of the mortgage market, and I started as Chancellor a new 95% guaranteed mortgage. And it seems to be working, because I keep meeting people who have got one. And if I'm elected, I want to turbocharge that policy. Because if we can get 95% mortgages for young first-time buyers with a great credit history, then it won't take them decades to save up for the deposit, and your son can get on the housing ladder quicker, and so can 1 million more young people, because that's what a Conservative government should be delivering, and that's what I would love to do.
While you rightly identify Mayor Khan's woeful record of house building, the Conservatives haven't hit their target year after year either, have they? How would you address that?
Well, actually, the record over the last few years has been some of the highest rates of house building that we've seen in this country for decades.
12 years. Yeah. Some years they've been lamentably low. Would you change that and how?
Well, as I said, I gave you 3 particular ideas on how we will increase the supply of housing, Nick. But we also need to look at the mortgage market as well. If we do both of those things, I'm confident that Monique's son and many others can experience the feeling that we all did.
And you'll hit those targets you set, those building targets that you set.
It's right that we just increase the supply of housing, but we need to have practical ways to do it. There's no point having a target if you don't actually have the means to deliver it, so we should focus on the means.
Number 1, Annabelle in Kent. Annabelle.
As someone with a passion in musical theatre, I'm concerned with what the pandemic has had on the West End and the industry as a whole. What specific things will you do to make sure that the West End is back up and running like it was before the pandemic?
Yeah, right. Thank you, Annabelle. And, you know, you're right. It's such an important part of our country, and particularly here, obviously, in London. And that's why in the pandemic, as in the midst of trying to save all our businesses and support jobs and think about that side of what we had to do, thanks to, in part, the unbelievable lobbying and championing of Nikki Aitken, who's sitting right here, we set up something called the Cultural Recovery Fund. And together with the Arts Council and others, we managed to save pretty much all the theatres and cultural venues across the country from the bankruptcy and insolvency that they faced in the pandemic. And I was recently at one of the events celebrating it, and it's been an extraordinary success. And that's something that should give you confidence that it's a sector that I completely champion. And that when it comes to the West End and everything else that Nikki does brilliantly, well, we need to make sure a few things. We need to make sure that London's safe, that it's a welcoming place for people. That's why crime is so important. But we also need to make sure that travel is easy, because London requires people to visit it. We need to make sure our visa regime is quick and it's simple for people to come, that there aren't queues, and we have fantastic places for them to stay when they're here. Those are all the things that Nikki's delivering as a local MP. Those are all the things I would be delighted to support her and all the London Conservatives to do.
I'm not quite sure when you said crime why you pointed at me, but I'll I'll just take that because we discussed it.
We discussed it. That was
how appropriate that it was that it was a question about the theatre, because we have to bring the curtain down. Your appreciation, please, for Rishi Sunak.